Chris, great to see you as always, and thank you for making a bit of time to come and have a chat. I know you're super busy. Let me just kick this interview off. Like a lot of people in the tech space at the moment, um, a big chunk of the world are paranoid that your tech's going to make them unemployed. I
Well,
mean, tell us about what you're doing with the tech
well,
and what you think about that statement.
yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big change, right? And,
Yeah,
unemployed is a bit of a stretch, right? But, if you go on LinkedIn and look for electronic data interchange, there's 70,000 people that have that in their title,
yeah,
thereabouts, right? And, um, the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a lot different than the previous 50, right? Um, and, you know, one of the real benefits of, having any EDI experience really is, you know, eh, you really understand the business process between, how businesses deal with each other, how they work, and what type of mechanics or the real raw mechanics at the trade level, right? In terms of who's going to do what by when and how and once you understand that data. And once you understand, exactly, you're infinitely valuable to the rest of the organization, right? Beyond, simply getting the pipes going in the right order
yeah.
and fields mapped to the right areas, that kind of thing, right? But it's an older technology, right? And so a lot hasn't changed, right? There's been a ton of tools and software that have been built around it, but it's very rarely opportunity, really. When a new technology like AI comes along and gives everyone the ability to do new things, better, faster, cheaper, right?
Yeah.
So,
So, just for the people that are listening, I mean, just tell us what you're trying to achieve with your technology so that people get a sense of what we're talking about here.
yeah, sure. So, there's this ancient technology, right? It was invented for I believe, the aerospace industry in the 50s.
Mm.
And it's called Electronic Data Interchange. And it's, e-commerce gets a lot of the hype, right? But when it comes to B2B, there's a lot more to it, and electronic data interchange is sort of the 80%, right, in the Pareto principle, right? It's really the bulk of trade, right? And how business documents like purchase orders, invoices, shipping notifications, acknowledgments, are exchanged. And there's 1,000 different document types that cover all manner of trade in terms of customs and clearing and bidding and award of freight and all these things. But where we're really focused is on a mid-market consumer packaged goods entrepreneur that's growing, and they've done a direct to consumer model, or they've had, good success with e-commerce, and maybe their revenues are, at 7 figures or maybe even 8 figures. But, in order to go to 9 figures of revenue, they have to embrace retail, right? It's very rare kind
Yeah.
of breed to be able to punch up above without retail distribution. And in order to do retail, you have to do electronic data interchange, right? The major retailers out there, the days of having, little old ladies type out purchase orders and process
Yeah. It
invoices
doesn't
from cut
happen anymore,
envelopes.
does it?
No, it's
No.
complete. It's remarkably inefficient too, right? In terms of
Yeah.
error and all that stuff. So,
Let me ask you though.
yeah,
So what you're saying to me is just to make sure I've understood this correctly. What you're saying to me is that your technology sits at the heart of how many, many, many thousands of companies do business together. Is that a
that's
fair
right.
sum?
Yeah, and there's a standard, and there's multiple standards. There's one in Europe called EDIFACT. The North American standard is set by the American National Standards Institute and the X12 subcommittee, and it sets these things. But it's known as the only standard that's not a standard, right? So if you had a Walmart purchase order and a Target purchase order and wanted to process that into your business system, right, an ERP right, you would find it very difficult, right? Because the it's the only standard that's not a standard. They're not alike.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's a lot of mapping and adaptability that has to happen at a programmatic level, right? To make sure everything goes in the right place and that it's error free and that there's, real true supply chain collaboration. And, as a result of those, that effort that needs to be done, it's manifested itself in, in a ton of very talented labor that can go about it, right? And get the job done with the right tools, right? And if you're a big corporation, no big deal, right? You can hire a few of these people and they sit in your IT department. They do an excellent job and that's all great. But for a smaller size company, right? 10, 20, $50 million company, it's a big ask, right?
So
Especially
you
with
fix
reducing
that,
margins.
and you fix that headache for them essentially, don't you?
Essentially, yeah, right. So Surpass is really geared up to be, a managed service provider. I know that term gets, thrown around a lot, but essentially what we're looking to do is to take over that and do that for them, right? And that's more important, right, than any of the underlying technology or,
Mm.
methodologies that we use. All of that stuff, all that smart stuff, right, is there just to effectualize the service level, right? You need to be perfect and you need to be timely, right? And responsive, right? And these are concepts in business that are, timeless, right? But all of those things get better when you can, and especially in the cost effective, area, right? They get better with the right types of architecture and the right types of technology. And that includes, anybody building software today is going to be leveraging AI, right?
So
So,
let me ask you, I mean, I can totally see why the proposition is valuable, all over the place. I mean, I totally get that. But tell me about the moment when you realized that you were building something that could become a global player. I mean, tell us
oof.
about that moment.
Well, we had the good fortune of meeting a very talented technical person, right? And I think that's Tim, if you're watching, and he's our head of engineering, and he has put together some early pieces that give us capabilities very quickly. And one of those examples is support for a European, standard. So we've got several competitors, right? It's an old industry, so it's rife with competitors, right? And so, some of these competitors, even, people north of $200 million, don't support an automatic mapping to
Right.
European EDIFACT standards, right? One of our competitors released it, about 6 years after inception. We released it over the weekend. And it really enabled us to, to get there really fast. And we did it, by customer request, right? So, they are expanding into Europe. They, have big plans to grow revenue and it includes that and their product works there and retailers like it. So we had no choice, right? It was, you either do this or we're going to go and find a way to do this, right? And that changes the context of the conversation really quickly. But we're able to roll this out so quick and so effortlessly, with a
And
team.
let me ask, because you raised it. I mean,
Yeah.
why can you do that and why can't your competitors, or why are your competitors very slow at it? I mean, just tell us about that. Because you would have thought, you know, they could do it faster if they really wanted to, or maybe I've got that wrong.
One would think, right? But I think with most of these, large companies with large code bases, they become, difficult and onerous to manage. And, one of them has, 400 engineers, and it's mind blowing, right? For us to really understand. If we're as commercially successful as they are, maybe we'll be blessed with the same problem, right? But at the moment, we're looking at this and scratching our heads, thinking, if you were to design something from scratch,
Yeah.
right, with all the modern efficiencies and all the right pieces and to do the right things, right? With, an internal MCP and a lot of the, automatic stuff that can happen. Why would you, right? Why would you need to do that in that way? And of course, hindsight's always 2020. They're not building on a modern architecture, right? They're building on stuff that, is at the earliest, right? Our nearest competitor is 6 years old. Our second nearest competitor is 10. And, I think, some of the juggernauts have really been there from the beginning, right, for 50
And
years.
it's
And
very difficult to change in those circumstances, isn't it? I mean, it's possible, but it's very difficult. I mean, I've been there.
yeah,
And in
uh,
terms of how you see your role as a CEO, I mean, I'm really interested in how people take an idea, which is usually some kind of solution to a problem. So they take an idea about how to solve a problem, and they turn it into they try and deliver a global impact with clients all over the place and all the rest of it. I mean, how do you see your role as the CEO in that context? I mean, I know you don't have the title, you sort of joint founders, aren't you? But in terms of how you steer the organization in the right way, I mean, how do you see that process and
well, I think y- we're in a unique position to sort of, understand a lot of the pieces, right? And our job is to really communicate what we know about those pieces and how they fit together and how they work off each other in both the market, in the view of our customer, in the context of the available, alternatives, including the alternative of doing nothing, right? And really trying to help people inside the company understand the same challenges that persist in our target market and to see how that could, how that's going to be affected, right? And um, I think that there are certain, there's other aspects in terms of, driving toward goals and setting right metrics and, you know,
but what you're saying again, just to make sure I understood this correctly, what you're saying is that you're guided by what customers want. Is that a fair summary?
that's completely the fair statement,
Yeah.
right? That's exactly what it is, right? If you're not guiding what if your guiding principle isn't what's best for the customer, it's a false narrative, right? And you're really going to end up in trouble because ultimately the customer's the boss, right? They're the ones hiring you. They're, it's their
Yeah.
money, not yours, right? And you have to really understand what it is that you're solving for them and get really good at it, right? In order to, you know, to benefit from their business, right? To benefit,
I mean,
and
one of the
all.
things about leading a business in that way I mean, certainly my experience is that it can be a bit of a roller coaster. You have good days, days. We were talking about this before we came on here, weren't we?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, what is it about this particular project, this particular mission, if you like? What is it that kind of inspires you to bounce out of bed every morning and get stuck in? Because it can be a bit of a challenge, kind of a bit of a fight. I mean, what is it that motivates you?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of things, right? Intrinsically, some people are just wired that way, right? And I think I'm one of them. I think that there's different strokes for everybody, right? I'm also, trying to achieve something for my family, right? And that's a huge motivator for me. But when you speak to our customers and try and understand their real journey, right? Going to create, some consumer product from nothing, or, some of these folks are buying something, that's sort of halfway along the journey where somebody else got stuck and they think they can, take that to Zed, right? That's really a neat, um, it's a really unique opportunity and it's extremely motivating to help them along that journey
And
because
pretty interesting, I would have thought. A pretty
it
interesting
it's
experience.
amazing, right? I mean, we have some customers, that I've worked with over the last 20 years that, are, we knew them when they had 5 million in revenue and then, 200 million in revenue and sold the business, right? And, and now, do other things, right? So it's really an amazing journey and it's an amazing journey for everyone, right? I look at my own life and think about what has transpired,
Mm.
and being secure enough to start a family, and there's a ton to it that that makes me very grateful,
Yeah.
right? And
And and other than young children waking you up in the middle of the night, what are the other things? I mean, what is it about the job that you do find challenging? I mean, what are the things that keep you awake at night?
yeah, there's huh, well, you know, there's always, marching to the beat of the market, right? It's ever changing. There's, you can um the competitors can come out with new things, and likely will, and will be challenged by, standard, uh, people that are in stuck ways of thinking, right? Not everyone believes what you believe, right? And, your job isn't to convince everyone, but, to find the people who also believe what you believe. And, that makes it a lot easier, right? But it certainly is frustrating when you're trying to grow, and or you have a strong belief in where the market's going, and then you run into so many people that are just not there with you and believe that
Mm.
it'll always be this very, tunnel vision, right? Head down, it'll always be like this. And or somehow they won't be around, or whatever, when the industry does change, right? That they'll never witness it, like they weren't around for .com or AI or any of these things,
But
right?
dealing with that stuff day in, day out can be pretty soul destroying, can't it?
It can. It
Yeah.
can. You really do have to, reframe and work, to keep yourself positive, and keep yourself grateful, for the opportunity. And those people out there, right? There are people that believe what you believe, and a lot of them are, potential customers. And if you find them, and your message resonates, it's absolutely amazing, right? It just
Yeah.
feels wonderful to hear the value that that you're providing, right? Echoed back through a conversation where it's like, yeah, I don't want to do this. I want to do that, right? This
Yeah.
is where I want to focus. And, if you could handle that for us, if you could do the EDI, that
Yeah.
would be
And,
amazing.
and let me ask you about communicating with those stakeholders. I mean, how do you approach that? I mean, it seems to me you've got a boatload of people that believe the same things, that probably agree with what you're doing, and then there's a boatload of people that either don't understand it or don't agree with it, or. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you find a way to communicate with the right bunch of people, and how do you do that? I mean,
Well,
what's your thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, I try and use anecdotes and stories, and, framing the right context of history, especially the history of technology, right? And the fact that innovation is a lot more likely to come from, two guys in a garage than it is from the mega corporation buying up all the airwaves and telling you what to think at trade shows, right? So when we, if you can find people that just understand that naturally, right, then you're already halfway there, right? And I think if you spend the rest of the time explaining that, right now, right, this second, right, this is the worst the technology is ever going to be,
Yeah,
right?
it's only going to get better, isn't
Right.
it?
It's
Yeah,
like you know, look at where the last 20 years have taken us, right? And where the next 20 years are headed, right? And the pace of change is accelerating, and that is an exciting opportunity
yeah,
for, these other entrepreneurs and their brands, and the people that they employ, and the opportunities that are available to them after that, right?
yeah,
And it's just
yeah.
it's an amazing
I
thing.
mean, I think if you're of that mindset, it's a very exciting time. I think I understand that some people aren't, but I think
Yeah.
if you get
Well,
that,
there's another, piece of context, and I can't remember the exact stats, so forgive me if I get them wrong. But the economy is, in terms of labor efficiency, has increased 226% or something in the last 50 years. And we've created, hundreds of thousands, if not millions globally, of more employment opportunities for everybody. So it's not that, it simply goes away, right? When you get more efficient labor, it has a compounding effect and
Good for
provides other
everyone.
opportunities, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. My wife is from a town in Western Massachusetts that was famous for making buggy whips. Back in the day, right? So, and yeah, the whole town fell apart when the automobile sort of took over, right? But Detroit happened, right?
yeah,
As a result,
yeah, yeah.
so it's one or the other. So it's not always um, you know, um, a cataclysmic occasion, right? Where industry shifts, cause people to rethink certain things or, discard old ideas and old ways of working.
Yeah.
So,
And let me ask you about, I mean, one of the things that, to make progress, you need to bring people on board with you, don't you? I mean, you might
mm,
not need thousands of them, but you do need help. You often usually need people to help you make
absolutely.
progress. I mean, what's your thoughts? How do you see the process of getting the right people on the bus, as it were? I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, um, at our stage, I think it's different for each size company, right? But overall, they at a minimum have to have their needs taken care of, right? And that's the bare minimum. And but people want to be a part of something, right? It's a very things are rapidly changing for in the market, and businesses are growing faster than ever. I think was it Chat GPT or Open AI got their the fastest company ever to reach a billion, fastest company ever to reach 6 billion. So it these things are going to happen very rapidly, and people want to be a part of that, right? And it's not simply the dollars, right? It's really the experience of people that say, I was there when, and I get to work with some of the best people and the talented people, and it was all great teamwork and such. But um, you know, when we're also recruiting, we're also talking about what is happening in our industry and why we feel we're best positioned to affect it, right? To change it, at the global level for forever. That's real, that's really ambitious and it's going to be very difficult, right? We're not there yet, but we're trying to convince people that that's the mission, and missionaries beat mercenaries, right? So
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of putting it, actually, missionaries rather than mercenaries. I mean, I think probably quite a few people would agree with you about that.
yeah, it's not my quote, it's somebody
No,
else's.
and when I mean the other thing that I think is really challenging, particularly when you're working over such a wide, scope of things, is
Mhm.
how do you create, you get great people on board, job number one.
Yeah.
You've then got to create an environment in which they can thrive and grow and develop. And I mean, how do you do that? What's your thoughts on that? Because, when you're working with relatively small numbers of people, I
Mm.
mean, the benefit is that you know everyone. But equally, that kind of culture thing can often get kind of lost as an explicit thing. I mean,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I heard culture described as, how people would make decisions if you weren't there or anybody else wasn't there,
Right.
right?
Okay.
If they're all alone, right? What would they do? How would they, and how, what principles would they use to drive, toward that? And, I think, um, that's a good way to look at it. I think we try and embody that, right? And to make sure that they, learn what's super important to us might also have a reason for being that important, right?
Yeah.
And there's uh you have to dedicate some amount of time to professional development and training and learning new things, right? Especially if you're in the technical field, because of the pace of change is
Yeah.
blistering, right? And if you're not keeping up, you're falling behind. So a big part of that is finding the right people that are wired that way, right? That are geared toward, being lifelong learners, right? That show evidence that of picking up new things and synthesizing them and applying them. and I think that it's difficult to search for. It's a little easier once you get them, in the seat and you're starting to interview and to move them on. But if you don't, and if you don't commit to their, development and education, they're going to move on, and then you've got a turnover problem.
Yeah.
So,
But let me ask you that. I mean, there's more to the kind of cultural piece. There's more to creating an environment for people to thrive than decision making and professional development. I'm not saying for a moment those things aren't really important. But what about things like values? And I mean, I mean, how does that play out in your environment?
yeah, I think that values are extremely important, right? To the culture and to understand, our the way that we're geared about taking care of the customer and being relentless in the pursuit of improvement, right? Whatever that might be, and as it applies to different situations, but
Mm.
and ruthless amount of honesty, at a radical candor, right? Kind of fan. So that there's a whole bunch there that people need to learn, right? And it's difficult to teach, right? It's difficult to so the only way that we know how to do it is just to embody it.
Yeah.
And by embracing it, I think
Yeah. I was
we can
about to
move
say it's really all about
organizations.
living it, isn't it, really?
Yeah, yeah, that's it, right? Every day, right? It's,
Yeah.
um, but also, being part of those successes, right? And then being able to, being able to connect the dots, right? And say, this is why, right?
Yeah.
This is why we, had, whatever, small or, medium, large, whatever, right? Whatever type of success it is, being able to tie that into the story, right? And create its own kind of cultural, inside story about how that came to be and what the effect was, right, going forward, and how it's perhaps changed our trajectory,
Yeah.
or perhaps on the negative experience side, right? Maybe it was a great opportunity to learn, pivot, and
Yeah.
move toward a better way of working.
Yeah, I
So
mean, it's interesting you say that because I think, writing your own story, as it were, is one of the things that makes business interesting because you can do that.
yeah.
Nobody else writes it for you. You write your own story, don't you? And it's a great opportunity to take the initiative around those sorts of things.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Right. I really believe that. And, it was one of my favorite quotes from Lincoln, which is, the best way to, was it the best way to predict the future is to invent it.
Yeah,
Right. And, no one else can live your life for you. And the same applies to your business, right? Who else but you, right? Who else but your business? And sure, it might may not be the fit for everybody. It might not, might fall short of, somebody else's expectations, but you've got to, leave it all out there. You've got to be, who you got to
and
be.
every business has a different story, don't they? I mean, that's one of the other interesting things is that you can write your own story, but also it'll be different from everybody else's. Let me just turn to the
Yeah.
process of building a business. So, in terms of where you're at the moment, I mean, where do you want to get to?
Ah,
What's
well,
your destination? I mean, when will you be happy
hmm.
that you've arrived, as it were?
That's a weird, I don't know, right? That's a tough concept. I mentioned earlier about how people are, just wired differently, and I've had a problem with, whatever I got to. It was never as satisfactory as I thought it might be, right? Whether that was, through sport or, anything else, right? You know, it, with the exception of my family, right? Although, those first few years can be very trying, right?
Yeah,
And make you doubt yourself a bit. But, I think where Surpass is headed is a very exciting place, right? Because there's very few other businesses that are uh, built and oriented in the way that we are, technically and professionally, right? And we also, instead of the kind of um, mantra of, being the young, bright kids right out of Stanford, and, nothing against those, right? The Y Combinator types. But, we have, combined 150 person years of experience in our business with the technology that we're dealing with electronic data interchange and how retailers uh, work, right? And that gives us some depth of institutional knowledge to
And you
really
sound
leverage.
you sound pretty proud of that when we've
I,
spoken
I
about this in the past. I mean, it obviously
well, it,
matters to you.
It does, right? It's our, it's an internal strength that we intend to leverage, and, we intend to bring to bear on every customer that we have to prove to them that we're worthy of their business and their praise, and hopefully, they'll tell a friend, right? And we'll move it forward. But what's the alternative, right? Is to, go in there and suggest, well, there's 30 options, and, somewhere in that stack, if you pick a random card, you might end up with Surpass, and that's pretty good, right? We don't want to be there, right? We want to be at the forefront, at the tip of the spear for this type of thing, for, consumer goods entrepreneurs that are, looking for something a little bit different, right? And they want something that's faster. They want something that's more modern. They want something that's more nimble, that can change on the fly, and ultimately doesn't, cost them an arm and a leg, right?
Yeah, yeah. And seeing as you've mentioned customers, I mean, let me ask you, from your perspective, what does a great customer look like?
Well, a great customer for us would be, somebody that's, getting a new ERP system.
Mhm.
They're really taking their business seriously, and, they've gotten a lot of success, and people like their products, and it's obvious that, they're going to be successful if they can do all the other things right. But, these retailers work on, razor thin margins, right? They have, most of what they do is operational excellence. If you look at, Walmart or Amazon supply chain, right? It really has to operate that well. And that means, your data is going to be perfect and timely and all those things. So, it's that kind of customer that says, I don't know what I don't know about the space, and I
Right.
need to leverage experts in order to get there, right? And that they realize the value of, bringing technology to bear on problems that you traditionally bring people in and, employ, right? And you can get there a lot faster with a managed service provider for EDI that can, go in and fix all this stuff for you.
Mm.
Um,
And those relationships, one of the other things that's important is not just establishing those relationships, but keeping them and building them, actually, isn't it?
yeah,
Over the sort of medium to long term. I mean, what's your take on that process? Because business can be bumpy, can't it?
it can.
And
Yeah.
keeping people on board can be a challenge. I mean, what's your take on that kind of relationship building process, partnering? I mean, what's your thoughts
Yeah.
around?
Well, I think most customers, you know, they want you to succeed, right? They don't want to have to swap you out and,
No.
use another provider, right? So they can appreciate some of the commercial aspects that you have to bring to bear within reason, around, price increases and whatnot, right? And but it becomes very obvious when there's a disconnect, right? You end up with a customer that gets very vocal. You hope that they're vocal with you, and these days, instead of getting online and, leaving a bunch of one-star reviews, because there's, probably 10 sites to go do that at now. And if you're incensed enough, you'll do it. I think that there's, they want to know that that you have their best interests in mind, right? And that means that you're, taking what they're paying you and reinvesting in the product, reinvesting in the people, right? So that you're growing right along with them, and that you're going to be with them in lockstep until, they're done with their journey, right? Whether that be, exit, retirement, or, whatever it is that they want to get done. So it's,
Yeah.
it's a real privilege.
Yeah. And in terms of, I mean, in terms of the process of kind of going global, I mean, we touched on this before we started talking here. I mean, At the moment, I know you're very active in the US, in Canada, Mexico, the sort of places that are adjacent to the US where you're based. I mean,
Yeah.
do you think you're going to have to evolve a lot as you go into Europe? Because I know a lot of your customers are already in lots of different jurisdictions. So do you think you're going to have to evolve over time? And if
Yeah,
so, in what way?
absolutely. Well, the first is being able to integrate, different roles and, of a global workforce, right? I think
Yeah,
there's an incredible opportunity there, for folks, but we're dealing with, consumer goods producers that are largely US based and Canada based. And it's foolish to think that they're going to be exactly like the ones that we find in other places, be it Europe and Asia. And so we'll have to, adapt to their way of not just, working in the supply chain with the technical bits, because I think we've got that down, right? But, how they make decisions, right? How do
yeah,
you market and sell to those folks, and how do they like to buy, and who do they trust for information about, who's, better than whom, or given the right situations, and those very situations, right? How are those, particular situations going to be very, very different, right? And how quickly can you react to those and adapt to those to provide value to the customer, to make sure that, you know, excuse me, that there's something there that we can really,
mm. I
solve
mean,
for.
yeah, it's interesting you make the point about decision making because it seems to me that one of the things that is actually quite significantly affected by culture is the way people make decisions. I mean, people make decisions in I don't know, Shanghai very differently to the way they make decisions in London
Mm,
because of the kind of underlying culture, the kind of the sense of business ethics, what they
sure.
feel is important and not important. So I think the big thing that culture affects, in my view, is the decision-making process, which of course is really at the center of what you're working on, isn't it? So, I
It,
mean, how do you
yeah.
think you're going to have, I mean, how will you deal with that as you get bigger and bigger? I mean, how's that going to work?
Well, I think a lot of it we'll figure it out along the way, right?
Mm.
But one of the guiding, principles will be helping them understand the where they're at in the journey, and how we've helped people, that are a lot further along in their journey, right? And, because we have customers that have, invested seriously in technology and leveraged that over labor, and that have created some incredible businesses. So if their goals are to look a lot more like them, right? At the, billion-dollar and up level, whatever got them to, $10 million in revenue is fantastic, right? It's to be commended, but, it's not going to get them to a billion.
No.
And they have to understand, that we have some of that knowledge, right, to share with them about how to do it. In the terms of the decision making, it's also right back to that, right? It's right. So what decisions do you think they made, right? You've got a contemporary of yours across town, be that Shanghai, London, or New York, right? And they're at $1 billion in revenue, or $100 million in revenue, right? What do you think they did, right? How do you think they made their decisions,
Yeah.
right? And what do you think informed those decisions, in terms of what was going on in the market and their own company, and what they saw, as an advantage, and how they took advantage of that.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, one of the things that interests me when I talk to entrepreneurs is that they, generally speaking, generally speaking, entrepreneurs are very upfront about making mistakes.
mm,
I think mainly because if you make a mistake, you need to identify it quickly and fix it. Otherwise, it costs you a lot of money. So I think there's quite a
yeah.
big motivation to identify and fix problems quickly in the business world, which I think is a good thing. Have you ever had a really, really big mistake? You know,
Yeah,
that you thought might floor you. And what,
sure.
what was it, and what happened, and how did you sort of deal with it?
Oh gosh, there's so many to pick from. Um, let's see. Um, I think the biggest mistake that entrepreneurs make is they let their ego decide for them instead of the best interest of their customers and the
Yeah.
best interest of the people in their care. Right? As a leader, you know, where you steer, could sink the ship, and that's vitally important, and a huge responsibility for anyone to undertake. So thinking that, somehow you're, omniscient or, about, what to do or how to do it
Kind
is
of
pretty
hubris.
foolish.
It's hubris, really, isn't it?
Hubris. In a
Yeah.
word. That
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that is right, and it's led to the downfall of many. Right, if you're a fan
Yeah.
of history, and
Yeah. Yeah.
we could see it, currently in the current, zeitgeist of the world and the leaders that are in it, and but it was a mistake that unfortunately is difficult to identify because there can be a lot of self-confirmation about it,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
occasionally you're right, maybe even 70% of the time, but eventually you end up wrong, and you have to learn, um, that was the culprit. It wasn't the
Yeah.
singular decision. It wasn't or even the combination of the last, few decisions that went wrong, right? It was really the fact that your attitude sucked, and
Yeah, I
you
mean,
really,
somebody said to me a little while ago that they thought the biggest thing that plagues people is confirmation bias. Thinking that we're right.
yeah,
We're clearly not, but we don't want to deal with
yeah.
the other side of the coin. Which I think
And
is
there's some huge benefits to that too, right? I mean, being able to, put on the entrepreneur's armor, so to speak, right? And say, I know something that nobody else knows,
yeah, yeah,
right? And there's some power in that because you're able to convince yourself and also, a team, right, that, this is the way the market's going and we're going to be there to meet it, right? And regardless of what everyone else thinks, if it's negative. So there is some advantage to having that, but it can work against you, if you tend to turn your ears off to the things that really matter. And that's, the customers and your employees,
yeah,
right? And telling you how they want to work, right? And
yeah,
you really run the risk of, pissing a lot of people off, which, as it
yeah,
turns
yeah.
out, is not very good
Yeah, yeah,
professional
easily done,
advice.
not easily done as well, isn't it, really?
It really is.
Let me ask you about the flip side. I mean, you're obviously really successful now, and on a journey to be much more successful. I mean, certainly the way it seems to me to be going for you. I mean, what would you attribute your success to?
I think, when our kids were much smaller, they're, teenagers now, but my wife used to say on the way off to school, make good decisions. And
Okay.
that's it, right? Making sure that those decisions are, throughout the day. It's what are you going to do?
So,
It's
so let me ask you about that. I mean, that's a really interesting point. Making good decisions is obviously how you become successful, but it's very easy not to make good decisions. I mean, I've made plenty of stupid decisions.
yeah, yeah, we
How
all
do
have.
you tell me what's your approach to making good decisions? I mean, how do you see that? How do you do that? How do you think about that?
I think um, it's tough because sometimes there aren't any good decisions, right? And you just have to make the best decision given the circumstances. The decision that often comes down to it is what's within your locus of control versus anybody else's, right? And people do spend an inordinate amount of time focused on what is outside of their control, right? And so they fail to make decisions that are within their control.
Yeah,
And those decisions could be as small as, what I'm doing between, 7:15 and 7:30 on a Friday morning, right? And,
yeah,
those decisions are, they're there are thousands of them, right, in a day. And so to understand that each one of those, compounds and pays dividends like interest, right? And is really, I think part of anyone's professional journey, right? They have to understand that. And the sooner that they can understand that, the better.
Yeah.
Some people figure that out very early, and some people, just have a natural, drive toward, doing the right thing and high discipline, and they apply it even before they know it, right? Because that's just who they are, and they have an advantage, right?
Yeah.
But there are plenty of people out there that learn it along the way and are able to apply it to their own lives and just if the decision is to mindlessly scroll the internet for a little bit, and sometimes that is a decision I make, so and but it can't come at the expense of other things, right? I think that's the final piece of that, right? Every decision comes at the expense of something else, right? If you're going to, we say this to our own customers, right? It's, you're going to, if you're going to decide to do EDI yourself, right? It comes with these lists of advantages and these list of disadvantages. And you have to decide, for yourself and your own business, whether or not you want to outsource that or you want to do that yourself, right? And, and over the next, 3 to 5 years of your business trajectory. So, it's a big decision to make. And, for
And
some
very
people,
easy to get it wrong, actually, I think.
it's
So
it's so incredibly easy, right? And then, for folks that do get it wrong, because we, we do get involved, just like, regular personal mistakes, right? Recognizing that mistake for what it is as soon as possible, admitting it,
yeah.
changing course, right?
I mean, just
Um,
on that point, I mean, Muhammad Ali famously said,
hmm,
you don't lose by being knocked down. You lose if you stay down."
yeah, exactly.
Have you ever felt totally knocked over by something where you thought, I don't know whether I can recover from this? Have you ever had that experience?
I don't know about the not recover from this, but I certainly, we're taken down a few pegs, right? I've been terminated before, right? I've been, laid off for non-performance, right? I've had, certain things, it's certainly not a rosy picture to paint. I think that there's some degree of, dishonesty, that you hear from people that are in places that you're looking up to, right? That they somehow did make all the right moves because they have all the evidence of it, and they don't really value, the learnings that came from those, from those mistakes.
I'm always quite skeptical of people like that because my experience is it's when you really screw things up is that's the moment that you learn. I mean, I think it's actually very hard if you're consistently successful. If things go your
Yeah,
way.
that's the confirmation bias thing you mentioned the
Yeah,
other. Now that's it entirely, right? It's like, oh, this is I must be right all the time because I'm so damn successful. And
yeah,
yeah, you're not provided the opportunity to learn
yeah.
through,
Or you haven't
direct
stuck your neck
feedback of
out far
failure.
enough. Or you
Sorry?
haven't stuck. I mean, sometimes people don't take risks
Right.
either. I mean, to really learn and to get into a situation where you could be knocked over, it's because you've taken a fairly significant risk. I mean, if you never take risks, there's no joy in life, I don't think.
Yeah, there's some people that'll never take a risk, and
No.
and that just works for them, right? For me, it's not an option, but I get it. Fear is a thing, and there's comfort is a thing, but I don't think I learned a lot by being comfortable, right?
No, I agree. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think that's
so
critical, isn't it? Being comfortable, being uncomfortable
yeah.
is somebody said to me the other day. Let me ask you a couple of last questions before we wind up. So if you were, I mean, you've got lots of experience. If you were approached by a rookie CEO, somebody at the beginning of the journey, I mean, what would be the most important piece of advice you'd give them?
Well, it really depends on, kind of what, where he's at, right, in the whole journey, right? I think, my experience is, in that kind of 0 to 1, kind of phase of a business. So it's a little bit different. And, I would say, the listen to the customers, right? And, listen to other people that are listening to the customers, right? And understand what it is that they want to do rather than what you want to do. And, I think I heard the quote about falling in love with the problem, right? Not the
Yeah, I've heard that.
solution, right? And, when you understand what the customer is going through, then at that point, you bring your entire body of knowledge, right? And the knowledge of a really, bright and equally successful team members, right, to the equation, you can really do some amazing things, right? But if you think that, all the knowledge is here, right, that's hubris. And, I think that that would be the one piece of advice I'd give.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question, which is not so much about your business, but about AI. I mean, how do you see AI changing your world? I mean, how are things going to shake down over the next few years? What do you?
Yeah,
Mm,
it's going to be a wild ride.
yeah,
I think that there's a lot to it I don't, fully understand and appreciate, right? But I think, if we do end up with automated general intelligence, right, the big question seems to be what are we going to do with all of our free time? And but there's a, mistake there, which is, understanding, through the history of technology, how those, we always found something else to do. And, we did improve civilization significantly as a result. So there's going to be plenty for us to do, and there's going to be plenty of employment, and there's going to be lots of new opportunities and new fields and things for folks to figure out, right? Just because, one or two industries have to, reimagine themselves, like the buggy whips, right, of yore. That's going to happen. But we're, mankind is incredibly resilient at figuring out, these things and adapting to them. And, those most willing to adapt to change, right? The most able, the most flexible, right? Are those that are able to succeed in spite of any of those, fears and apprehensions about, what types of technology might happen, right? So
yeah,
I think AI is just, it's really the, the biggest opportunity of our time,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. And Chris, that's a really positive note to end on. One last thing, if people want to get in touch with you, how should they?
Yeah, you can check out our website at surpass.biz, and or you can hit me up on LinkedIn, right? And I could see you there.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you for taking time to come and have a chat with us. I mean, I always enjoy talking to you. It's always very interesting and very amusing as well. So I really appreciate you taking time
Likewise,
out to
Paul.
come and have
It
a
was a
chat.
real pleasure today. Thank you very much for your time, and
No
it was
worries.
great to speak with you.
All right. See you soon. Cheers. Bye bye.
Yeah, take care.